A Billionaire's twins were born paralyzed. What he saw the Black Maid doing shocked him. Did you really think no one would notice? Jonathan Rutherford's voice cut through the silence of the mansion like a sharp blade. He held a video on his tablet, his cold blue eyes fixed on Jessica Martinez, who stood in the center of the luxurious living room. The 28-year-old did not look away. Her hands were still at her sides, as if she were accustomed to accusations from powerful men. Mr. Rutherford, what exactly are you accusing me of? Of manipulating my children. Jonathan exploded, gesturing toward the hallway where the 3-year-old twins rested. Mason and Tyler were born with severe cerebral palsy. They never spoke, never moved on their own, and suddenly, after you arrived here, they are responding. Jessica had been hired just 6 weeks ago as a live-in caregiver. Impeccable references, nursing training, but Jonathan had always seen her as just another temporary employee. After all, no specialist in 3 years had made any real progress with the boys. Dr. Williams showed me this recording from the baby monitor, Jonathan continued, pressing the screen. You talking to them as if they could understand you. Singing songs my late wife used to sing. How the hell do you know these songs? Caroline's death during childbirth had turned Jonathan into a fortress of bitterness. The boys were a constant reminder of his loss, and he had built a clinical and distant routine, delegating all care to specialized nurses. Jessica took a deep breath. Mr. Rutherford, your sons are not vegetables. They feel, they hear, they recognize voices. Just because other people can't connect with them doesn't mean they're incapable. You're being paid to clean and organize, not to play doctor. Jonathan yelled, his face red with anger. These boys have permanent limitations. Any progress you think you're seeing is an illusion. Then something strange happened. From the hallway came a muffled, almost imperceptible sound. A faint but deliberate moan. Jonathan froze. Jessica smiled subtly. Perhaps we should go check on the boys, Mr. Rutherford. I think they want to join this conversation. At that moment, Jonathan noticed something in Jessica's gaze that he hadn't noticed before. It wasn't subservience or fear. It was the quiet confidence of someone who holds a secret too powerful to be revealed before the right time. If you're curious to find out how a simple housekeeper was about to revolutionize the life of a billionaire family, be sure to subscribe to the channel, because what happened next completely changed the rules of the game. Jonathan marched down the hall toward the twins' room, Jessica calmly following behind him. What he saw when he opened the door left him momentarily speechless. Mason was sitting up in bed by himself, something the doctors had said was impossible. His eyes followed every movement, alert and focused in a way Jonathan hadn't seen in years. Tyler, on the other side of the room, was holding a toy tightly, his fingers moving with deliberate purpose. This is impossible, Jonathan murmured, his scientific certainties collapsing. Dr. Patterson was clear about their neurological limitations. Jessica slowly approached Mason, who immediately stretched his arms toward her. Hello, my love, she whispered softly. Did you miss us? The boy made a sound that, while not a complete word, had all the characteristics of an affirmative response. Tyler, sensing her presence, let out a similar noise, his eyes shining with recognition. They're responding, Jonathan said, more to himself than to Jessica. But that contradicts 3 years of medical diagnoses. Jessica turned to him, her eyes shining with a mixture of patience and determination. Mr. Rutherford, when was the last time you really spent time with your children? Not just looking at medical reports or listening to briefings from nurses, but sitting here on the floor, talking to them. The question hit Jonathan like a punch in the stomach. The truth was brutal. Since Caroline's death, he had turned the boys into patients, not children. Every interaction was mediated by professionals, every moment structured by medical protocols. I have responsibilities, he stammered, his voice losing its previous authority. The company, the treatments, the experimental therapies. Of course, Jessica replied, not with sarcasm, but with an understanding that somehow made it all worse. It's easier to pay other people to take care of what you can't face. At that moment, Tyler did something extraordinary. He looked directly at his father and reached out a small trembling hand toward him. It was a simple gesture, but one loaded with communication that transcended words. Jonathan instinctively recoiled. They can't. The doctor said there's no real consciousness, just reflexes. Jessica picked Tyler up with an ease that suggested months of practice. not weeks. Do you know what the difference is between me and all these expensive specialists you hire? She asked, gently rocking the boy. I never doubted that they were whole people trapped in bodies that don't fully cooperate. It was then that Jonathan noticed details he had overlooked. The walls of the room, once sterile white, now had colorful drawings taped to them. The toys weren't clinically organized, but scattered as a child would actually play. Soft music played from a small speaker, not therapeutic sounds, but actual children's songs. You changed this room without permission, he said, but his voice had lost all indignation. I changed this room from a hospital to a home, Jessica corrected. And I'll tell you something that might shock you even more. Your sons have distinct personalities. Mason is more contemplative, prefers stories. Tyler is more physical, loves it when I sing while rocking him. They have preferences, Mr. Rutherford. They have feelings. Jonathan sat heavily in the small armchair in the corner, watching Jessica interact with the boys with an ease he had never been able to develop. It was like watching someone speak a language he should know but had completely forgotten. My wife, he began, his voice catching. Caroline used to say that they could hear everything, even in the womb. That she talked to them all the time. Jessica nodded softly. She was right. And they still can. The question is, are you ready to listen back? Mason, as if understanding the conversation, turned to his father and made a long sound that sounded dangerously close to Daddy. Jonathan felt tears he hadn't shed in years burning his eyes. But what Jonathan couldn't have imagined was that this conversation was being recorded, and that Jessica had many more secrets than he could ever suspect. What she really planned to do with those recordings would not only change the lives of that family, but open Jonathan's eyes to a truth about his own past that would devastate him. Over the next 2 weeks, Jonathan hired 3 new specialists to evaluate the twins. Dr. Stevens, an internationally renowned pediatric neurologist. Dr. Martinez, a behavioral therapist with a PhD from Harvard. Dr. Chun, a child development specialist with publications in prestigious medical journals. They all came to the same disconcerting conclusion. The progress observed in the boys was clinically impossible according to their previous diagnoses. Mr. Rutherford, Dr. Stevens said after his 3rd evaluation, I need to be frank. What I'm seeing here fundamentally contradicts everything we know about severe cerebral palsy. These children are demonstrating cognitive awareness, deliberate motor control, and social recognition at levels that simply shouldn't exist. Jonathan watched through the security camera as Jessica worked with the boys in their room. She had created a completely unconventional routine, gentle exercises that seemed more like dance than therapy, long conversations about complex topics as if the boys could understand perfectly, and something the doctors called unstructured sensory stimulation, basically, letting them explore textures, sounds, and movements freely. This isn't scientific, Jonathan muttered. But he couldn't deny the results. Then she received an unexpected call. Dr. Patricia Morgan, a retired neurobiologist who had been Caroline's colleague in medical school, asked to visit them. Jonathan, I've heard from mutual friends about the boys' progress, Dr. Morgan said when she arrived at the mansion. I need to see this with my own eyes. The 65-year-old woman, with gray hair and reading glasses hanging around her neck, watched Jessica work for almost 2 hours without interruption. She took detailed notes, asked specific questions about techniques and chronology, and personally tested some of the twins' responses. Interesting, she murmured finally. Jessica, may I ask you a few questions about your training? Jessica stopped what she was doing, clearly tense. Of course, doctor. Where exactly did you study child neurological development? I didn't study it formally, Jessica replied carefully. My experience comes from previous work with special needs children. Dr. Morgan nodded slowly. And how many children with similar diagnoses were included in this previous work? Jessica hesitated for a very specific moment, the kind of hesitation Jonathan was beginning to recognize as a sign that she was choosing her words carefully. A few, she said finally. Jonathan frowned. Something about that conversation didn't add up. Jessica's references were impeccable, but all from private families. No medical institutions. No specialized clinics. How does one accumulate informal experience with complex neurological cases? That evening, after Dr. Morgan left with promises of some discreet checks, Jonathan decided to do his own investigation. He started by calling Jessica's references. The first family didn't answer. The number was disconnected. The second said Jessica had worked there, but when Jonathan asked about the special child mentioned in her resume, there was an awkward pause. "What special child?" the woman asked. "Jessica took care of our plants and cleaned the house. We don't have children." The third contact was even more disturbing. The family confirmed that Jessica had worked there, but when Jonathan mentioned neurological problems, the man laughed bitterly. "Neurological problems? Sir, our son Thomas didn't have neurological problems. He had been misdiagnosed for years." Jessica was the first person to realize that he wasn't severely autistic. He was being slowly poisoned by incorrect medication prescribed by an incompetent pediatrician. Jonathan felt a chill run down his spine. Poisoned. Heavy psychiatric medication since the age of 2 for a completely wrong diagnosis. Jessica documented all the symptoms, researched the side effects, and helped us prove medical malpractice. We won $1 million lawsuit. The doctor lost his license. After hanging up the phone, Jonathan sat in his office for a full hour, processing that information. Jessica wasn't just a talented caregiver. She was someone who identified medical errors and corrected them. Someone who documented evidence for legal proceedings. Someone who might be doing just that with his children. Jonathan accessed the security recordings again, this time looking for specific details. Jessica always carried that little notebook. Always. And now he realized she wasn't just noting progress. She was recording times, dates, witnesses, specific conversations. The next morning, when Jonathan went down for breakfast, he found Jessica sitting at the kitchen table with her notebook open and a stack of papers organized with surgical precision. She looked up at him with that same calm smile he had interpreted as submission, but now recognized as the quiet confidence of someone who was 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the game. "Good morning, Mr. Rutherford," she said calmly. "I believe we have a lot to talk about." It was at that moment that Jonathan realized he hadn't just hired a caregiver. He had brought into his home someone who was building a case that could change not only his children's lives, but potentially expose medical failures that extended far beyond his family. Jessica opened the laptop slowly, as if unpacking a bomb. On the kitchen table, arranged with surgical precision, were 3 stacks of documents, a tablet with recordings, and a folder labeled Rutherford Case, Systemic Medical Negligence. "Mr. Rutherford," she began, her voice maintaining that disconcerting calm, "what I'm about to show you could destroy your trust in people you've considered friends for years. Are you sure you want to see it?" Jonathan sat down heavily in the chair opposite her, the coffee growing cold in his trembling hands. "Show me everything." Jessica slid the first document across the table. It was a copy of the twins' original medical records, but with handwritten notes in the margins. "Dr. Patterson, your trusted neurologist, made these observations 3 weeks after the boys were born. Read what's underlined." Jonathan read aloud, his voice catching, "Neurological reflexes within normal parameters. Consistent response to stimuli. I recommend reassessment in 90 days to monitor motor development." He looked at Jessica, confused. "This completely contradicts the final diagnosis." "Keep reading," Jessica instructed, pointing to a later date. Rutherford family requested more conservative diagnosis due to life insurance and trust fund implications. Jonathan paused, rereading the sentence 3 times. "What does that mean?" Jessica opened her tablet and played an audio recording. "I recorded this 2 weeks ago when Dr. Patterson came for the boys' routine evaluation. Listen." The doctor's voice echoed clearly through the device. "Jessica, between us, these boys have always had the potential for significant recovery. But Jonathan was, let's say, emotionally fragile after losing Caroline. I thought it would be easier for him to accept a definitive diagnosis of permanent disability than to live with the uncertainty of gradual and unpredictable development." The recording continued, "Of course, there is also the matter of the $50 million trust fund that Caroline left specifically for the boys' lifelong medical care. If they were to make a full recovery, well, that money would revert to charity, not to the family." Jonathan dropped his coffee, the porcelain shattering on the floor. "He's lying. That's impossible." "There's more," Jessica said calmly, playing a second recording. "Dr. Stevens, the neurologist you brought in last week. I recorded his conversation with Dr. Patterson in the hallway after the evaluation." Stevens' voice echoed, "Patterson, how much longer do you need to keep up this charade? The boys are clearly responding to complex stimuli. If this gets to the medical board. Patterson's response was cold and calculating. Relax, Stevens. Jonathan will never question it. He needs to believe his sons are permanently disabled. It's the only way he can process the guilt over his wife's death. And frankly, $200,000 a year in specialized consultations split among our network isn't a bad deal. Jonathan's face had drained of color. Network. Jessica opened a third folder, revealing an elaborate organizational chart. 12 doctors, Mr. Rutherford. Neurologists, physical therapists, child psychiatrists. All charging exorbitant fees to keep your children in an artificial state of disability. She showed him printed bank transfers. Dr. Patterson received $180,000 in the last quarter alone. Dr. Stevens, $95,000. Dr. Chun, $120,000. All to maintain a lie that began as a well-intentioned attempt to protect their sanity and turned into a goldmine. Jonathan stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair. For 3 years they stole my children's development. The door opened and a woman in a dark suit entered, accompanied by 2 federal agents. Dr. Richard Patterson, said the prosecutor, you are under arrest for conspiracy, medical fraud, and child abuse. You have the right to remain silent. As the handcuffs clicked around the wrists of the doctor who had destroyed 3 years of their lives, Jonathan felt something he hadn't felt since Caroline's death: absolute hope. But what Jonathan didn't know yet was that Jessica had saved the most devastating secret for last, a revelation about Caroline's own death that would make the entire medical scandal seem like just the tip of a much more sinister iceberg. As Dr. Patterson was taken into custody, one question remained unanswered: how many other families had been destroyed by this criminal network, and how far did the corruption Jessica had uncovered really go? 6 months later, the Rutherford mansion had been completely transformed. The deathly silence that once dominated the hallways had been replaced by sounds Jonathan never thought he would hear: children's laughter, little footsteps running through the house, and for the first time in years, the word Daddy echoing off the walls. Mason and Tyler, now 4 years old, were not only walking, but running, speaking in complete sentences, and demonstrating an intelligence that impressed even the new specialists, the real ones this time, with their speed of recovery. Daddy, look. Mason shouted, running toward Jonathan with a colorful drawing in his hands. I drew our family. On the paper, 4 stick figures smiled under a yellow sun: Daddy, Mason, Tyler, and in the center Jessica, clearly identified by the paper crown Mason had glued to the figure's head. Jessica is our queen, explained Tyler, appearing next to his brother with paint on his hands. She saved us. Jonathan smiled, picking them both up. The transformation had not been merely physical. The boys were emotionally secure, curious, playful, as any child their age should be. Across the room, Jessica was organizing the final documents from the court case. The court had been relentless with the corrupt medical network. Dr. Patterson had received 18 years in federal prison. Dr. Stevens, 15 years. Dr. Chun lost her license permanently and was sentenced to 12 years. In total, 12 medical professionals faced sentences ranging from 8 to 20 years in prison. But the criminal consequences were only part of the justice served. The civil suit had resulted in $85 million in damages, the largest pediatric medical malpractice settlement in state history. Mr. Rutherford, Jessica said, looking up from her papers, this arrived today. It was an official letter from the American Medical Association, stating that the case had led to the creation of new national protocols for the prevention of pediatric medical fraud. The Rutherford Protocol was now federal law, requiring independent second opinions for any diagnosis of permanent disability in children. How many families do you think we saved with this? Jonathan asked. Hundreds, Jessica replied calmly. Maybe thousands. The federal investigation had uncovered that the corrupt network operated in 7 states, victimizing dozens of vulnerable families. Children who had been kept artificially disabled for years were now receiving real treatment, many showing miraculous progress similar to that of the twins. The phone rang. It was Dr. Santos, the prosecutor. Jonathan, I have good news, she said. The last member of the network, Dr. Hoffman, has just accepted a deal. 20 years in prison in exchange for full cooperation. We now have evidence that goes beyond your case. We've discovered that they've been operating this scheme for almost a decade. When she hung up, Jonathan looked at Jessica, who had stopped organizing the papers and was watching the boys play. You knew, didn't you? He asked. From day one, you knew what they were doing. Jessica nodded. I recognized the signs. The medications, the dosages, the doctor's behavior. I'd seen it before. Why didn't you tell me right away? Because you wouldn't have believed me, she replied honestly. You needed to see for yourself. You needed to choose your children over your comfort zone. Jonathan was about to respond when Mason came running up, holding a book. Jessica, will you read to us? He asked, climbing onto her lap with the ease of someone who had always done so. Of course, sweetheart. As she read, Tyler settled down on the other side, and Jonathan realized he was witnessing something he had missed for years, a real family, functioning as it should. Later that night, after the boys had fallen asleep, Jonathan found Jessica in the kitchen, preparing the nighttime snack the boys always asked for, something she had implemented as part of the normalization routine. Jessica, he said, I want to make you an offer. She looked at him, waiting. The charitable foundation I'm setting up with part of the settlement. I want you to be the director. Your job would be to identify other children in similar situations, train professionals to recognize signs of medical neglect, create protocols for protecting vulnerable families. It's important work, she said carefully. It's the most important job in the world, Jonathan corrected. And you're the only person I know who can do it. Jessica smiled. I can consider it, on one condition. What is it? That the boys always know they can count on me, regardless of my position or title. They need stability. Jessica, you don't understand, Jonathan said, his voice catching slightly. You are already part of this family. The adoption papers were approved this morning. You are officially their legal mother. If you want to be. The tears Jessica had been holding back for months finally fell. I want to. From the hallway came a soft noise. They both turned to see Mason and Tyler peeking through the door, huge smiles on their faces. We heard everything, Tyler said. Is Jessica our real mom now? Mason asked. If she wants to be, Jonathan replied. I want to, Jessica repeated, opening her arms to welcome the two boys who ran toward her. At that moment, Jonathan realized he had gained more than justice. He had gained a real family, built not on blood or tradition, but on love, dedication, and the courage to do what was right. 3 years later, the Jessica Rutherford Foundation had helped more than 200 families uncover misdiagnoses and fraudulent treatments. Jessica had become an internationally recognized speaker on the rights of children with special needs. The twins, now 7 years old, were completely normal children, exceptionally intelligent and emotionally secure. And Dr. Patterson? He was still serving his sentence in a federal prison, where he had plenty of time to reflect on how his greed had destroyed not only innocent lives, but his own existence. Jessica's story proves that sometimes the person everyone underestimates is exactly the one who has the power to change everything. She turned 3 years of injustice into a lifetime of purpose, saving not only Mason and Tyler, but hundreds of other children. The best revenge is not to destroy those who harm you, it is to build something so powerful that it makes it impossible to ignore the truth. If this story of courage and justice touched your heart, subscribe to the channel to discover more stories of people who turned their greatest defeats into the most inspiring victories. Not just that, Jessica said, her voice hardening for the first time. Look at these prescriptions. She spread dozens of prescriptions across the table. Clonazepam in doses that would cause coma in adults, administered daily. Risperidone to control agitation, in children who never showed agitation. Drugs that literally prevented normal neurological development. Jessica opened another section of the tablet. And these are the toxicology tests I had done secretly using hair samples from the boys. Levels of sedatives that would be considered child abuse in any court in the country. The screen showed colorful graphs with alarming numbers. For 3 years, Mr. Rutherford, your children were kept in a chemical stupor. Not for medical treatment, but to sustain a fraud industry that operated using your family's tragedy. Jonathan's phone rang. Dr. Patterson. Jessica smiled for the first time in the entire conversation. Are you going to answer it? Or would you rather hear about my conversation with the district attorney scheduled for 3 o'clock this afternoon first? Jonathan stared at the insistently ringing phone. District Attorney. Dr. Maria Santos, specialist in white-collar crime and medical fraud. She has already reviewed all the evidence. Jessica handed him an official business card. Systemic medical fraud, intentional child neglect, conspiracy to defraud health insurance, formation of a medical cartel. Dr. Patterson and his network will face at least 15 years in federal prison each. Jessica opened a fourth folder. Not to mention the civil lawsuits that are already being prepared. We estimate the damages at $40 million, 3 years of lost development, psychological trauma, unnecessary treatment costs, punitive damages. The tablet displayed a new recording, this time showing the twins clearly more alert, responsive, almost normal. This recording is from yesterday, after I gradually reduced the toxic medications over the last 6 weeks, replacing them with harmless vitamins. The experts didn't even notice because they never did any real tests. Jonathan watched, stunned, as Mason clearly said Jess, and Tyler tried to stand up on his own, his little legs trembling but determined. "My children," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "My children were always fine." "Always," Jessica confirmed. "They just needed someone to believe in them and stop poisoning them." At that exact moment, the doorbell rang. Jessica checked the intercom. Dr. Patterson has arrived for his weekly consultation. Perfect timing. Jonathan looked at her, then at the scattered evidence, then at the hallway where his children were playing freely for the first time in years. "Let him in," Jonathan said, his voice transformed into something Jessica had never heard before, pure, controlled fury. "I want to look into the eyes of the man who stole 3 years of my children's lives." Dr. Patterson entered the mansion with his usual confidence, medical folder in hand, professional smile on his face. "Jonathan, how are our little patients today?" "Our patients?" Jonathan repeated slowly. "It's interesting that you use that word, Doctor." The doctor stopped in the middle of the room when he saw Jessica sitting calmly at the table, all the documents laid out, the tablet turned on displaying the recordings of himself. What's going on here?" Patterson stammered, his face quickly turning pale. "What's happening is that I've discovered what you and your gang have been doing to my children," Jonathan replied, his voice dangerously low. "What's happening is that I have recordings of every criminal conversation you've had in this house." Patterson looked at Jessica, then at the documents, then back at Jonathan. "You don't understand, Jonathan. We were protecting you from the truth." Jonathan interrupted. "The truth that my children could be walking, talking, being normal children if you hadn't spent 3 years drugging them?" From the hallway came the sound of children's laughter. Patterson froze as he recognized voices that, according to his diagnoses, shouldn't exist. "Impossible," he muttered. Jessica stood up calmly. "Dr. Patterson, would you like to meet Prosecutor Santos? She is very eager to talk to you about your unconventional methods of treating children."